Welcome to the Empower LEP podcast. I'm your host, Jana Parker. I'm a licensed educational psychologist, group practice owner, and the owner and a mentor at Empower LEP. Today, I had the pleasure of hosting Dr. Peter Faustino, who is our NASP president. And we just got back from NASP. He and I had an amazing conversation about our experience at NASP. And then we got into his career as a school psychologist, someone who opened his own private practice, and somebody who's been really invested in being part of his state affiliate organization and then the national organization of school psychologists. He is just a really energetic guy, so kind, so nice, just an absolute pleasure to talk to. And of course, I hope that you enjoy this conversation as much as I enjoyed having it. All right, here we go. Welcome to the Empower LEP podcast. I am here today with Dr. Peter Faustino, who is our NASP president, sitting NASP president. Thank you so much for joining me.
No, my pleasure. My pleasure. It's exciting to be here, and I'm happy for the conversation today.
Well, I have so many questions for you and so little time. So first, let's start with just kind of a little NASP debrief. Because I would love to just hear, as the NASP president, how that was for you. I listened to a podcast with you with Chris Ponce, and you were about to go to NASP, and so you were talking about that. And so, coming off of that week, what were some of the highlights? Like, how did you spend your time? Tell me.
Oh, yeah. A couple people have asked this question, and I must say that it was a very wonderful, unique experience to be planning something for an entire year. I mean, I don't think I planned much of my own wedding, 30 years ago, and I have 3 daughters. We are not close to planning a wedding yet, but it's probably the biggest thing I've ever had to plan a year in advance, where you have a vision in your own head, as well as you are spending time making like big and small decisions, and then for it to finally show up and for it to unfold. And at least my answer to your question is, like, it was better than I even imagined. That week in Seattle, we expected on the West Coast typically smaller numbers than sometimes when we're in, like, say, Chicago or on the East Coast, because people can drive to those locations. So, the expectations, we were setting our expectations a little bit lower as far as attendance, and we had 6,000 plus attendees in person,
Yep.
and then perhaps another 2,000 virtually that signed up. And so that definitely beat expectations. I think the offerings, the keynote, the energy that sort of gets built over the course of the year just made me feel elated by the fact that, we were finally together in person, which is just, unbeatable as far as an experience when you're in an elevator and you bump into somebody and you make a connection, when you are having all those small conversations in between sessions, or you're whispering in the back of a room about how much you love the panel presentation or whatever it is. So for me, it was amazing. It was absolutely great. And I think you said, how did I spend my time? I'm not sure. I just remember waking up at 6 a.m., going nonstop, and then perhaps around 9 p.m., sort of things were slowing down by the end of the day, and just feeling like, I'm only doing this once as NASP president, and so I'm going to give it my all. And it was an amazing week, an exhausting week, but really amazing. So yeah, by all metrics, we were very pleased about this year in Seattle.
Yeah. Did you get to go to some talks? Like, did you actually get to go and see some things?
Not as many as I would have loved to. I remember being such a nerd when I was younger. I'm still a nerd, but I think when I first started attending conferences or conventions, I would go to every session I could possibly get my hands on. Sometimes I would even split sessions. I'd be like, all right, I'm going to start here, and then this is an equally interesting session, so I'm going to run over to this one and just grab bits and pieces of information. And then I would often fill in the gaps by just like hanging around the bar late at night and seeing which presenters were there, buying them a drink, and then picking their brain about, the things that I really wanted to know. This year, as NASP president, when I said that I was sort of weighing in on some of the big and small decisions, I got a chance to select like the distinguished lecturer for NASP, which my selection was Dr. Celeste Malone, who for me has been incredibly impactful in my leadership journey. Her work in social justice, I think, just inspired me as a white male to want to do more, to be in spaces where I was going to have conversations that others may not. And so when you say, like, what sessions did I attend, I gave the sort of introduction or the opening remarks before Dr. Malone, went on stage. And so then I was able to sort of sit and just embrace or, kind of take in everything that she was giving in her presentation. So there were probably like 5 or 6 of those types of featured sessions, I think they would call them, or presidential strands,
Yeah.
where I was able to really be a participant or an attendee. But for the most part, I was, running around and just had all kinds of other requirements and meetings that I had to attend. So I was splitting time, but I have no regrets.
Yeah, I can imagine you just having to be in a million places at once and trying to take it all in. I really felt like, okay, 2 things. Number 1, I felt like
Yeah.
this is the first this is the first NASP where I really felt like social media played a huge part of how connected people felt before being there and meeting people in person. I mean, even last year, it didn't feel quite like that. This year, I really felt like I knew a lot more people just from their online
Mm,
presence.
yeah. I, I mean, look, there's a part of me that wants to lean into the idea of that being intentional. And maybe some of it was. I mean, I will admit that prior to being NAS president, I was fascinated with social media and the connections that are made online. To the point where I know even just before we started this recording, you and I were talking about making connections with people where you feel like you know them and yet you've never actually met in person. So I think there could be a part of it that in the planning of this year, because of who I was as, as a practitioner, there were a lot of sort of, online connections that were sort of then coming to be in person. But I also think it might be just, as an evolution, how we communicate, how we connect, how both NASP and organizations are just conducting business. And a lot of it is, via the different platforms that we use to communicate. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like it makes people more accessible and
yeah,
leads to, I guess, maybe quicker connections and um,
yeah,
just feeling like you know a lot more people in the field. Like I mean, I've been around a long time. I feel like I already know a lot of people, but there's like I feel like there's even just this new generation of people in school psychology coming up, and like I would not have any idea who any of those people were it not for social media. But I think it's awesome that they're using social media to teach people about school psychology and
yeah,
yeah, I just think that there's a lot,
yeah,
it can lead to just a lot more connection, which I always like.
yeah, yeah. No, no, I love hearing you say that, and it's maybe something I'm not thinking enough about. But one of the strategic goals of NASP, of our national association, is around shortages. There is an acknowledgement that there is more work to go around than individuals who are in the field currently or remaining in the field and or that we are drawing into the field. Although we are trending in the right direction. I mean, we're actually beginning to see some data that suggests we're making an impact in that. but to your point, many practitioners, many school psychologists, when you talk to them and you ask them about their origin story, they will say to you, I fell into it. I was in graduate school, I was in undergraduate, and somebody mentioned this stealth profession of school psychology, and then I fell in love with it. So if we are, as a profession, sharing more publicly, using social media, this is a great thing. This is actually going to, I think, have a ripple effect into that shortages, into our profession, and helping people understand what it is we do, how important our role is, and why it's a viable profession for them to consider. So, yeah, it's a great observation.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes me think about how even as school psychologists, we're usually the people in the schools like no one knows there's a school psychologist until they do, and it's not usually a good reason, why
Right.
people learn that there is a school psychologist. Right? So
Yeah.
I do
Yeah.
think that there are people who are sharing with other like young people about the profession, people who are in graduate programs, and then parents, who are seeing. Like parents who are interested in understanding what school psychologists do and the IEP process and all the things. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, yeah. I think one of my favorite parent quotes, and this was actually just a few years ago, was a parent who said, I didn't, something to the effect of like, I didn't know there was a professional in the building like you to help me, but I'm so glad there is. It was exactly what you were just saying about like in their moment of weakness, in their moment of crisis, there is someone who helps them,
Right.
and parents are usually so appreciative for that connection and for the work we do.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah, no, it's great. I mean, I love it. I didn't know if there was a school psychologist in my high school growing up, but I guarantee there was.
Yeah, yeah, there probably was. And it also just makes me think about something we were talking about like off the air before we got on
Mm,
about how when you work in a school, you could say the same thing as a school district, school psychologist, and as a private practitioner, and parents
yeah.
might look at you completely differently, like either with distrust or with trust. And what that actually I mean, it's so true. And what working in private practice taught me about working in public practice, because I was doing
Mm,
both for a really long time, was that I really it made me elevate my practice in schools by taking everything to the base level with a new family who was coming in, who had no idea about the process, who was scared, fearful, anxious, stressed, worried, and realizing that every family who's coming into the IEP process is feeling that, and the more we can do to help um, provide knowledge about the whole process and make it really transparent, the better that relationship is going to go and the better that whole process is going to go. So it taught me to, working in private practice taught me to remember that that's what these families are feeling. And they really just don't know anything about this process that they're getting into, but we know everything about
yeah,
it. And so
yeah,
we have to start at the ground level with everybody. And that
yeah.
just helps to build the connectivity and the relationship.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I agree 100%. The privilege that I have had, or we have had, to work in schools and then to have the private practice and to hear the conversations differently from parents, it has honestly made me better, to your phrase just a second ago, a better school psychologist and a better private practitioner, because I no longer take those conversations for granted where I think, how do they not know, or what are they being told on the outside, and you begin to really sort of understand, I think, the nuances of both of those roles. And one that, again, I think sort of informed my practice about being able to say, I know what, parents are saying outside in the community when they don't think that I'm a school psychologist, or what's being said in the school when I'm in the private practice. And I've tried to bridge those, and I think if anything, it's actually again made me a better practitioner than people who are sort of disconnected and they just make assumptions about what happens in schools or doesn't happen in schools. And so
Yeah.
even to the point where I'm sure I've said, you don't actually need my services in private practice because some of what you're asking for is provided in the schools, and you should
Right.
go and have that conversation. And parents are really appreciative to say, I didn't realize that, or I didn't know. So,
Yeah.
yeah, no, I mean, it's one of the sort of unique beauties of the profession of school psychology.
Yeah, I just gave a parent talk to a Decoding Dyslexia California parent support group
Yeah,
in my county, and I did it virtually, and I talked about I talked about kind of the difference between when you're getting a school psych report versus private
right.
practice, and at the beginning I said, you know, I don't, if I were giving this talk, I'm going to tell you the same thing I would tell you if I were a school psychologist. However, if I were a school psychologist, I would kind of feel like I would be having to defend myself or something, right? Like defend why we do these things in schools. Whereas um, the reality is, it's just the process. It's just the laws. It's just the process. The school psychologist is not the person who made any of this up. And so I could talk about it as a private practitioner who has had experience extensively in schools, and I could just provide the knowledge rather than feeling like I had to defend myself as a school psychologist, like I'm going into battle,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. That's what I was saying earlier. I know you referenced it. It was very eye opening when I would be in the school at, say, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, having a conversation in a meeting, and someone would say, well, we're going to get a second opinion, we're going to look into this, are you sure that this is the best full in picture of the information? And then at 3:30 or 4 p.m. in the afternoon, if I was in my office, the conversation was very different, where it was like, thank you so much for giving us that exact same information.
Right,
Somehow we're paying you
right.
privately, and it seems to carry a little bit more weight. And I didn't always understand it, but I did try to dispel it and say, no, this is probably the same information we're giving across the board, but perspective and context sometimes can play a large role in it. So,
Exactly. Well, okay, my second thing that I wanted to say about NASP was just how amazing that keynote was. And you touched
mm,
on that a little bit too. How did we
uh,
find her? Where did she come? How did we find
uh,
her, honestly? It seems like a TED Talk to people.
you know, um, NASP is an amazing organization. We are trying to be cost, efficient.
Right.
So I would say to you that when I first got involved in the conversations, I had grand ideas like, we're going to have Lady Gaga as our keynote speaker, right? And then when you start to look into the details of that, it's not so simple to make those requests, or the costs that are involved, or what. I'm sure I had lots of dreams. So when some of those dreams start to come into reality, it's really about, what is the message? What is it that we wanted to focus on, that we thought was a key or core message for attendees? And for my presidency this year, the theme was catalysts in action. And where we had developed this was out of this role of me being a practitioner for 30 some odd years, where I really felt that that the magic that I brought, or the impact that I brought to a school system, was making connections, developing relationships with kids, with families, with community leaders, doing good work through those relationships, and then sometimes realizing that the role requires that we step away, that we allow that individual to sort of run and thrive and do really great work. And part of that was really important to step away because we had to preserve our own mental health. If we got so enmeshed or so involved in a situation, it may not be healthy. And I think that ties directly to the word burnout, or the conversation around burnout, which was not something that we talked about most of my career. But in the last few years, going around and talking to different states or different school leaders or just practitioners, the idea of burnout is a very real one, that people are giving of themselves to a very challenging situation, often very challenging work environments, both in and out of schools, around mental health, education, whatever it might be. And they are unfortunately burning out. They're not protecting themselves. And so when we started to talk about what the core message might be, Dr. Sahar Yousef was one of the sort of eminent researchers in this space. And the idea of having this, I know I commented earlier that I have 3 daughters, right? The idea of having like a smart woman in front of, the profession, to me was one of those priorities that I wanted to sort of showcase that. And she delivered. I mean, sometimes when you do this and you pick a keynote, you're hopeful that the message is going to resonate, but I think she delivered. So I'm grateful to hear you had that same experience, because I was in the audience just saying, wow, this is even better than I hoped.
Yeah, no, she was fantastic. It was cool to have somebody who wasn't a school psychologist but was in the field and was
Right,
studying things that we
right.
study. And she, yeah, I mean, it was just like she was giving a TED talk. Like she had the whole thing memorized. She just was like on
Yeah.
fire. And
Great
I like,
energy. She was all over
yeah,
the stage. Yeah.
yeah,
I think when she said something about that she worked for the social media companies and that they were intentionally designing this to be addictive or sticky, it was one of those like, whoa, I thought that was a secret that you weren't supposed to share, but we feel it. We know that that's happening to kids.
yeah. No, absolutely. I still remember, and I don't have a good memory, but I do still remember like several of the points that she made. And I was like, wait a second, I thought I was going to get some kind of like something after the fact. Like, well, aren't I supposed to be emailed something that I haven't? I don't know if I need to like go back on the portal and like download her stuff, but are we getting something in the email?
So something actually just came out, I want to say yesterday. I
Okay.
have to check my email again. And if you want, I can honestly make sure that I forward you that email from NASP, and you can share that with your listeners, because there really was a one pager. There were some other links. Dr. Youssef was really great about saying, I believe you are the people on the front lines of this work, and I want to empower you to do more, both for yourselves and for the students and families you're working with. So I will make sure I highlight those resources for you. They literally just came out like the other day.
Okay, perfect. 'Cause I don't check my personal email all the time. I like check my work email all the time. My personal sometimes has to stay, but NASP is on my personal email, so maybe I just haven't seen it yet. But yeah, well, she was excellent.
No,
Um,
yeah, good. Oh, I'm glad to hear that.
yeah, I mean, okay, so speaking of burnout, let's shift a little bit to you. So like a part of, what I
Sure.
really love about this podcast is um kind of highlighting what people have done with their careers that are helping them manage their own burnout, because I'm a true believer that whatever it is that we're doing in this field, like we have so many skills, we have so many things that we can do, we have so many things we could potentially be interested in learning more about or working in kind of like a niche area. And so I want to know what the journey has been like for you in terms of finding those things that have really interested you. I'm really curious about all of your involvement in your state organization and in the national organization, just kind of like how you've kept your bucket full over the years.
Yeah, it's a great question. One that I've probably reflected on more recently, when either I'm asked this question or just because I've been granted the privilege of some time this year. Um, I I think is can you hear me? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I could also
Okay.
hear your dog's making a cameo.
I had warned that at some point he was going to get a little jealous of the conversation and want to get involved, but
No
I know
problem.
he'll quiet down in just a minute. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think I had shared earlier. I probably did happen upon the profession just based on a synergy of things that were interesting to me. So when I was much younger, I was working at a recreation summer day camp with kids, and I loved the energy of being around children. Took a psychology class in high school and said, I'm hooked. I'm fascinated with learning more about human behavior and just child development and education, and went into the field of psychology. And then somewhere in college, someone said, well, if you like children and you like, psychology, have you ever considered school psychology? And I was like, what is school psychology? And once you're sort of like exposed to that, I think it's like an aha moment, to the point where I got my master's degree in community counseling psychology, and then a advanced certificate or specialist degree in school psychology, which allowed me to practice at that specialist level in schools in New York. Unfortunately, in New York, we don't have a pathway yet for independent practice at the specialist level. We've been working on it, and I think we are really close. There's a lot of converging forces, and we could probably use a whole nother podcast to talk about APA's change in their stance from doctoral only to masters in health service psychology, and the fact that there are probably like 20 states, 20 plus states that have pathways for independent practice in school psychology. But in New York, the only pathway at the time was to go and get your doctorate, to go on for an advanced degree, which again, had the privilege to do. As soon as I got that degree, there was this sort of appeal of like, I never want to leave schools, but I think I want to specialize in certain areas that I don't know if I see a lot of work in. And, this is going back 20, 25 years. So it was autism was a passion of mine. Early on, I met individual students whose behavior looked very different in the mainstream public schools. And at the time, they were using terms like childhood schizophrenia. I mean, I'm old enough where that was the label that they were trying to saddle students with, who we now know would be diagnosed with an autism spectrum condition. And so early in my practice, I wanted to specialize in autism. And so I did that. And it was amazing how quickly word spread of like, there's somebody who understands the world of autism, who understands families and the situation and behavior, to the point where, we're going to derive benefit from those sessions. And then the other interesting one was around just being a male in school psychology. I think
Right.
our profession is something like 85% women. I could be more. I don't
Yeah.
remember. So being a male in school psychology was very much like, a unique rarity, such that even in private practice, people would lean into, we have an adolescent boy that we want to connect with a male psychologist or therapist. And so those two things probably filled my practice rather quickly and gave me joy in giving back in those spaces.
Yep. Um, how, so did you start your private practice like pretty soon after you started working and like doing it on the side, or did you work in schools for a while before you shifted a little bit into private practice?
So definitely worked in schools for years. I worked in schools probably for 1 or 2 years before I started my graduate work for the PsyD. And then that was a couple of years, and then you have to take the licensing exam. So there was definitely a gap in only working in schools to when I started in private practice. But interestingly, I was very, and I feel like this is very much about your podcast and the support that you give to a lot of LEPs, is the idea that I was nervous about starting in private practice. I was like, I like giving away my services for free. I like not keeping a clock, right? Where it was like, okay, come in you're only here for 45, 50 minutes, an hour, whatever it is. And then I have to tell you, get out, or we're done, or it's over. In
Right.
schools, if you spend 10 minutes or 3 hours, there's not really a clock. And so I was fearful about what that would feel like, if I would be good at that, if people would sort of respond to that. And then I think the other part was the whole billing and asking for money, and how much do I charge, and what if they don't want to pay? What if they pay late? The business end really scared me. I mean, honestly, so much so that I joined a small group practice, and the person who led the group practice really helped me, I think, build confidence in being able to say, your time is money, you are valuable, don't ever, think twice about the service that you're providing, to the point where I feel like it's easier now. But I remember vividly the trepidation I had in starting a practice.
Yeah, you're definitely not alone. I think everybody feels that. It took me almost 7 years to feel like I was ready to do that, and then I still had everything to learn,
Right,
So
right,
I worked for a group
right.
practice for a long time too.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
And I think there are a lot of tools out there now that make it so much easier, but it's still one of those. I know we say imposter syndrome a lot, but that's probably the best way to describe it. Is
yeah,
you just feel like, boy, I went to school for 6, 7 years, whatever it is. I focus a lot of my time on these topics, and yet I still don't know, what the value of the work that I do is. And I don't know why we get stuck in that mindset, but I do wish that, as a profession, we would move past that, and begin to recognize what tremendous value we bring to an educational system, to the space of mental health, to therapy, to what we offer to families, schools, systems, whatever it is. I see that on the back end of my career as more than I did in the beginning.
yeah. There's never anything at NASP about building a private practice, and I wonder if like NASP would be interested in even having someone present on that. Maybe I'll put something in and see.
No, you definitely should. I mean, to answer that, I think, as honestly as I can, as an organization, we're primarily focused on the practice of school psychology, which predominantly is in educational systems, or trainers, or graduate students. So it's not necessarily like a strategic goal of our
Right.
organization. However, to your point, I think there is a growing percentage of members who are in that space that you just described, that would absolutely want to learn more about the journey, and the tricks and the pitfalls of that, such that whoever is reading, because it's a blind review process,
Right.
that if you put in an application, I do think, a submission
Proposal.
for,
Yeah.
yeah, proposal. Thank you. I think there would be great interest in something like that, and there actually has been an interest group. So one of the spaces that NASP allows a lot of latitude in what members' needs are, or what is important to the profession, is in our interest groups, or in our communities. And there actually is an interest group for alternative settings, or I don't know, I don't think it's called private practice. I think there's a term like alternative settings, but it really is mostly made up of people that are starting out in private practice and want to communicate with each other. And I see a lot of that on social media, as we were talking about before. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Well, food for thought.
Yeah, good.
um,
We'll co-present. How about that when I'm not president?
okay. Hey, absolutely. I would love that. Love that. Okay, tell me about, in our last little bit of time, tell me about what it's been like for you, like how you kind of got involved in your state organization and what
Oh,
that did for you. And
yeah,
then,
yeah.
how you got involved in NASP and
Oh, oh man, it's honestly, sitting here right now with you, like I'm definitely feeling like this is a dream come true kind of thing. The ability to focus on the profession that I love, like all day long. Like I wake up in the morning, and only have to think about NASP, and I wake up and I'm focused on membership and what's good for the profession and advancing our strategic goals. And I have a lot of help with this. I mean, there's an incredible staff at NASP. There's an incredible board of directors and volunteer leaders that really represent all 50 states, and different aspects of the role. But when you ask about where all that started, it was state leadership. I mean, I think I got really terrific advice when I was in graduate school about the value of joining your professional association. So that was, at the time, it was my state association, NIASP. It was the national association, which was NASP. And even at the time, APA was sort of the push of, you join professional associations because you're a professional and you're going to get a lot of wonderful, valuable information. And even in those early days of graduate school, the push to get involved in research or to present was really there when I was impressionable, to the point where I remember being in graduate school and doing poster sessions and thinking, this is amazing. I'm this brand new person to the field. People are interested in my research and what I have to say. And I'm in this larger group of professionals who've been doing this for a long time. And I think all of those organizations need your involvement. So if somebody is listening right now, please consider getting involved in state, national, whatever it might be, in committees, in task forces. There's plenty of work to go around. But those early years, you meet people, you get excited by the work, you get engaged in a way that I think kind of combats the burnout. So even if Monday through Friday I had a really stressful job and didn't feel as if I was making an impact, I would somehow get together with the members or the leaders from those state associations and feel like we had a bigger purpose. We had some sort of bigger drive that was maintaining us. And if you get enough of that fills your cup, you keep doing it year after year after year, to the point that, somebody says, oh, you're not just a chapter rep, you should be secretary. And, you don't have to just be secretary. You could plan a convention. You could be president, you blink and the next thing you know, you're there. So.
Wow. Well, so what happens when you're done? Like, what's next for Peter Faustino as he transitions off of his NASP presidency?
Uh, I wish I had a definitive answer for you. And I'd love to give you like the, what's it? Not the scandal, the
No,
sneak peek,
it's like the first,
yeah, yeah. What's the word I'm looking for?
at the tip of my tongue.
The exclusive. I wish I could give you the exclusive. Right.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, right here, right now, you're getting the exclusive. I wish I had it. I mean, the truth is, when your year is done as NASP president, my position as a high school psychologist is being held for me. That was part of the contract and the arrangement. So I will be returning to the high school where I've worked for the last like 8 or 9 years. And I'm really excited about that. I'm eager to go back to being with kids and, doing the work that I've done for decades. Although I do have a feeling that on one of those early days when a high school student says to me, "You're the worst psychologist I've ever met," I'm going to have this sort of like cognitive dissonance where I'm like, wait a minute, just a few months ago, people really liked the work I was doing. And now I'm being humbled, right?
Yeah.
But I do think I had to put my private practice on hold. That was really, really challenging. I didn't expect that to be as hard as it was, but it definitely was. So I'd like to think I'm going to go back to private practice. Yeah, I mean, I'll probably return to business as usual.
Nice. And is there still involvement in NASP after? Like, are you past president of
Yeah.
NASP and you still have
Yep.
involvement there?
Yep.
Okay.
For essentially 1 year, what I've teased is I really do move into the shadows and make way for the new leaders that are coming up, and just am there to offer guidance or wisdom if there is something that sort of comes up. But for the most part, it's a support network that I provide for 1 more year voluntarily And then, and then I'm actually excited to say I gave it my all, I gave it my passion, and now it's time for someone else to do that
Yeah.
work. So
Yeah. Well, I'm sure that your clients and your kids at the school and your, school district peeps are going to be happy to see you back. And, now you have just like a really great experience
yeah,
under your belt that's going
yeah,
to, I'm
definitely
sure.
some stories to tell.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Well, if you have any guidance for a young, impressionable school psychologist right now, what are your words of wisdom?
You, great question. And I suppose my answer would be that the role can sometimes feel like you're alone or you're in a silo, but you really don't have to be. I think there are state and national associations, there are wonderful podcasts like yours that I think bring people together, connect people in ways that you shouldn't feel as if you're doing this work alone. And if you lean into all of those opportunities, you are going to have a happier and healthier career that will combat burnout. So please consider them.
Awesome. I love that. And I do think that in this age of connectivity, that is a lot easier than it's ever been. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and we're a great group of people. I mean, we really
Oh,
are.
we really are. I mean, I know a couple other professions. They're not always so friendly. School
No.
psychologists are.
Yeah.
I think because we have to work in teams and we have to work with kids who keep us humble, we're a great group.
Yeah, and conferences are the best because it doesn't even matter who you end up with. You just know whatever group you end up with at like a dinner or in the bar, whatever they're going to be great and warm and great.
It's like we practice what we preach. Nobody eats alone, right? You're always going to find a friend. There's always
Yes,
somebody to talk to. We're a good group. That's
you
exactly
are.
right, Jeff.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Peter Faustino, for joining me today. And yeah, I'm excited for what your future holds.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Please reach out anytime you need anything. You've got me in the role as president this year, and I essentially work for you. So please let me know what anybody needs, you and the listeners of your podcast.
Sounds good. Thank you.
That is it for today's episode of the Empower LEP podcast. I hope that you found this conversation insightful and inspiring as you navigate your journey in private practice. If you enjoyed the episode, I'd love for you to subscribe and leave us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps us reach more LEPs and school psychologists who are looking to build their own path in private practice. For more resources and community, you can connect with me at empowerlep.com, on Instagram at EmpowerLEP, on Facebook in the Empower LEP Facebook group, or by email at jana@empowerlep.com. And just a quick reminder, the information shared on this podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be considered legal, business, or clinical advice. Be sure to consult with the appropriate professionals for guidance on your specific situation. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, you have the skills, you have the knowledge, and you have the power to create a private practice that truly makes an impact.